what are you going to want from the candidate? And it's important that we as a team look to speak to candidates about that early. For example, make sure that there will be a credit check or a criminal check or some kind of background checking. And as we said earlier, failure to document any of this actually leads us into spins and cycles, confusion, legal exposure, and can be potentially very costly indeed. So please make sure you're all set with the paperwork. There are templates available, of course. It's not as hard as you think it might be, but you need to be ready for it. And for many of you, if you've already got those in your home territory, they can be simply amended. Next slide, please. So we talked about HR operations a little bit with Ian Ross earlier, I'm sure, around setting up local payroll, managing benefits and ensuring compliance locally. When you think about setting up a local payroll, it's often good to look at whether you've got a provider that can be a global provider so that you have one source of payroll records and information. So there's lots of global payroll providers. Or indeed, it might be that your accountant legal provider can also run your payroll and pensions and benefits, so you can wrap it all in that way. So have as few suppliers as you can. I think that's really useful. And Ori Clark probably talked about that earlier today as well. In terms of managing benefits, when you first land on the ground, it may be easier for the individual to source benefits. Something that we can put people in contact with certain brokers. Certainly here in the UK, you can't have a group scheme for life assurance or PMI dental, for example, until you get to about 5 employees and above. So in those early days, it might just be a case of expensing certain benefits. But as I say, actually, there isn't a requirement to provide any of those benefits apart from auto-enrollment pension. And it can be that your compensation philosophy, for example, could be cash and equity. So you could say to candidates, look, we're going to provide you with a really interesting cash and equity plan. You're responsible for your own benefits above and beyond those statutory pension requirements, for example. And then in terms of employment compliance, as with many of the territories here on the phone, we would also be responsible for collecting everyone's right to work. So that might be visa, passport, documents, making sure that we've covered our data protection, privacy notices, conducting any checks, especially for senior leaders. I think it's really important that we conduct those checks to make sure that there's nothing in the background that we should be aware of. And of course, any diversity and inclusion requirements that you might have, there might be goals in your organization that you collect that level of data. There might be goals through your talent pipeline that you would like to know, what people from different backgrounds you've considered for different roles. So please make sure you wrap all of that in. And my last point there around an HR information system is a really good way to make sure you've got all of that data captured within an information system. And unfortunately, many people leave that too late. So an HRIS doesn't need to be costly. It's certainly worth doing early because the implementation is so much easier if you have one of the subscription services turned on really quickly, and it certainly saves on the Excel spreadsheets and the squirreling of where have we got all of the data for personnel files. So make sure you give that one some thought. There's all sorts of providers out there now, and again, it does not need to be complex if you get started early. And then onboarding, we talked about this earlier. I'm very passionate about onboarding for success because it's often missed. As I said earlier, there are too many examples, unfortunately, of leaders bringing on board other leaders, and they think that they know what the goals of the organisation are, they know what's expected of them from day one, and there aren't enough checkpoints and review discussions. So please, when you're onboarding a new employee in a new territory, whether they're a senior leader, salesperson, technical resource, or indeed a partner or anyone that's going to help you build your business, please make sure you manage communications proactively. So make sure you're communicating internally why these people are joining, what they're going to be responsible for. Have a plan, whether it's plan for day one, whether it's week one or the first 30 days. You won't believe how many people Peter and I talked to who say that they were really excited and then felt very let down in the first week or so, because they turned up into the office environment. There was no real agenda, you know, simple things like nobody took me to lunch. I didn't know how to do certain things. I wasn't buddied up with anyone. So I think no matter how senior people are, they really do need to have their hands held, socially distanced, of course, for the first few days. So do think about that plan in detail and
So,
agree and document some of those goals.
so just thinking about obviously the international aspects here, first person on the ground and onboarding someone from, you know, 12,000 kilometers or whatever it may be. What's your sort of thoughts around how to sort of embed and onboard? I mean, normally someone would fly down to HQ and drink the Kool-Aid or whatever the drink is, to integrate with the culture and the team, but that's going to be challenging. So, what's your suggestions for onboarding in sort of the COVID era and making sure it's successful?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, it's really worth using some of having a library of documentation. So there might be video clips, there might be press articles, there might be PowerPoint presentations that you might have delivered to the employees in previous monthly calls. So having a library of resources, that's a really good place to start, because people can then be directed to go through those. It can be a really good idea to set up, as I say here, an internal buddy. So that person can be virtual, and have a check-in every day just to see how they're getting on, words of wisdom, make sure they point them in the right direction for setting up new meetings. So I think having those resources online will be really useful. And actually, as you begin to onboard more and more people, having a library of resource that you have as a typical onboarding plan will be really important. So for example, on day one, you might want to have an hour with the IT team so that they help them set up their Outlook 365 or whatever your preferred supplier of email exchange might be. It might be that in week one, day one, you also always have an hour where they meet with the people team, so they can talk about, what their expectations are and go through their benefits and operational onboarding. So I think for most companies, there should be kind of a standard way of doing it, and most of that can be delivered virtually. However, there is a need, I think, for that sort of team camaraderie. So don't miss out on the opportunities to kind of have a time slot where you get the team together for some kind of fun exchange, whether you build some sort of quiz mentality in, or a book club mentality, or whatever works for you, whether it's an online game simulation. Just have times on a weekly basis, especially for those new people joining, where they can come together and just to understand each other a bit better. So online workshops work quite well for that. Good question. It's been challenging to onboard people this year for sure, but actually people are becoming more and more au fait with that way. So do agree and document goals and milestones. Make sure you're providing and seeking feedback and getting that two-way exchange. Don't have any surprises. It's so often the case that a new employee comes on board, their heart's racing, they're all inspired by everything that they've heard, and then they have that kind of like crash about week 2, where they start to go, oh, this is really complex, or I don't really understand how this organization works. So make sure you've got those feedback loops in. Use an internal buddy or indeed an external coach for the first 90 days or so that there is a kind of confidant route going on, and you can make sure that you don't have any surprises and you stay in contact. I've got a green screen, Peter. I'm not sure
It shouldn't
why
do.
that's come from. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
just
fine.
just just one question. I mean, occasionally even the best hires go wrong. I mean, how can you sort of judge whether something is going wrong, or a hire is going wrong, particularly the first person? Yeah, because time is money, and of course, things sometimes do go wrong. So, how can you, as a HQ, the founder, CEO, how can you judge when things are going wrong, and what should you do to be able to try
Yeah,
and?
no, absolutely. I think that's why these regular check-ins are really important, because with that feedback loop, you will start to see patterns and you can then nip them in the bud course correct, if you like, with the individual concerned. Be really open, be absolutely transparent about what you're hearing, give direct feedback, give examples of where things need to change, and have those regular reviews. And if it does actually get to a stage where you think, I'm not sure this is going to work out, I think you do owe it to the individual to understand why and provide them with an opportunity to either discuss it with you or actually course correct themselves. And in the worst case scenario, things do change. Offboarding might be a requirement. So here in the UK, we do have probationary periods. So you often will have 3 to 6 months to check out whether somebody's a good fit. And that works both ways, of course, for candidates too. However, for senior leaders, you might actually find that they are not happy with a probationary period, because many people won't leave an organisation and join another with a probationary period in place. So there are things contractually that we can look at to safeguard you, to give you a bit of time, but actually it's just about having an open and frank dialogue and making sure you manage it very quickly. Don't let things build up, and nip it in the bud and make a decision fast. If it's not going to work out, make a decision, move on, and any talent partner will have actually secured some kind of backup plan anyway.
Yeah, and I think from my experience, I have seen situations where, particularly commercial people, they're very good storytellers, and I've seen situations where individuals have actually built imaginary sales pipeline. I remember one individual for Central Europe. He was employed by 4 different companies that none of them knew about it, but he was managing them very nicely. So he spent all his time managing the company. So I think validation and this trust thing is really important. And I think ask to be involved in some of those sales presentations, ask to be part of the sales process. And once again, hopefully you've hired a really good one, but be careful because sometimes you're paying for their golf handicap to come down, or ultimately, you've got to be confident that you've got the right person.
No, absolutely. And any of those classic management 101 techniques, at the end of the day, they do need to be performance managed, and in the early days, it's really important in both ways to get them onboarded. So you can do that kind of in a gentle way and really make sure they're onboarded well. Great question. Unfortunately, it does happen. Not very often, but it does happen. So I'd love to hear from the people online. So I can see we've got participants dialed in. If you want to come off mute and maybe let me know what elements had a big impact from you, maybe what notes have you taken, what actions are you going to take, or any questions you might have.
While people are thinking about great questions, I suppose what I'd love to hear from you, Zoe, is about, if you're a founder, an entrepreneur, and you're building a business, and you've got to think about culture and so forth. How do you suddenly evolve the business, from maybe tech-led, very R&D-led, product-led, as opposed to being now commercial? Because that's, I think, the biggest challenge I see with companies, is to be able to make that transition from being very technical and very deeply focused on the tech to now selling.
Yeah, so I think the easiest place to start from tech to sales is really, as you've obviously onboarded some customers, is to check on that customer experience. So do some surveys, use some good tools to really hear back from your customers. What is it about your tech that they're enjoying, that they're liking? Why do people renew? Why are you retaining customers? Why are you losing customers? And I think your sales opportunities or your commercial team then can be part of those discussions and really bring them to life and help you to understand, okay, what's our product roadmap need to be to enable our commercial team to be able to continue to sell and expand some of our customer base, especially where you're launching new products potentially to existing customers. So I think the technical guys need to understand that they're not building a product that is all bells and whistles because they're really excited about their products. They're building product that's needed by their customers, and unless you're hearing back from your customers and your commercial team, you won't get the right roadmap and you won't be ahead of the curve in terms of that competitive advantage. So I think it's a must-have. I don't think it's a luxury at all, and it's really important that your product teams see that leap rather than kind of stay in their own bubble of building exciting products.
Robin, you have a question.
Yes, I do. Thank you for that. It was actually really interesting, and there's a lot of little bits I got out of it. A question around annual leave. I've heard that's a bit of a landmine in what some expectations are and what Australians perceive as what is appropriate or proper in the UK.
Yeah, so annual leave, we have an entitlement, a statutory entitlement to 20 days. 20 days a year plus 8 statutory days. So it actually sounds like quite a few days. For most employers, they would offer probably 25 days, to be honest. So it's 25 plus 8. But across Europe, that's quite, quite typical. So I don't know whether it's a landmine per se here in the UK. For example, we have to take our leave in the calendar year, and there is no entitlement to be able to carry it over or continue to be paid for it, if you like. In some of our European neighbours countries, you can actually only take 10 days and continue to carry it over, which could become quite a big paycheck 5 years down the line when you suddenly say, hey, I've hardly taken any leave. So my advice to clients is to monitor leave, to have a good record. Again, going back to an HR information system, always monitor people's leave. Always encourage people to take their leave in a regular way, because we know that well-being in the workplace is so important for everyone, especially off the back of this extraordinary year we've all been facing. And make sure you monitor it towards the end of the year. And some of my clients actually choose to have a shutdown at Christmas, for example. So if Christmas or that sort of festive period is important to your organisation and does work for you, you can also say, actually, you all have to take 4 days between Christmas and New Year, as an example. So you can manage it. Does that help you understand how it works?
It does, thank you. And just to touch more, because you mentioned the Christmas time, and Australia pretty much closes up for 4 weeks around that time. Is it just like the period between Christmas and New Year's that is closed in the UK? Is everyone back to business by about, the 7th or 10th of January?
Yeah, I think pretty much 3rd or 4th of January, depending on when the weekends fall, of course, but pretty much straight after the new year, people are back to the office. But you might find by the middle of December, it's pretty hard to get meetings in or have any meaningful meetings at least. So I think for most people, they check out when those dates fall. It might be that you close the office on Christmas Eve, for example, but typically it's not before then. But you will find that people are catching up with other things rather than doing meetings during that kind of week before Christmas Eve. So it's a good time for people to take their holidays and have a really good break. So I think from an Australian UK point of view, that would work really well.
Thank you, Zoe.
Pleasure.
Firstly, apologies for my dog. And also my managing of the presentation. But if there's any further questions, just put your screen on and ask away.
I have a question for you, Peter. So you obviously speak to lots of candidates coming into scale-ups. What's the most common piece of feedback you get from candidates? What do they want to know from scale-ups? What do they want more of?
I think the key thing for, particularly the first feet on the ground, is to have people to speak to, and I think also, the right sort of business hours where they can sort of be, have meetings that aren't necessarily eating into their evening or too early in the day. So once again, time zones are important, because people do put in long hours these days. But ultimately, I think it's getting that support, feeling that they're part of the business, and also getting responses. So particularly, I need some marketing collateral for my new marketplace. So the marketing department or marketing individual, needs to respond and basically get things across in good time. So you've got to really provide. You also got to give them so much love that they feel that they're part of the company. So quite often companies don't quite sort of get that. So I think very early in the first sort of 60, 90 days, you've got to smother them with love.
Absolutely. I think from a time zone perspective as well, I think for New Zealand it can be particularly challenging. And I often hear from UK candidates that they feel like they're always on calls in the evening. So do have that, one eye on making sure you're rotating team meetings so that it might be, twice a week they do early starts or a late night rather than feeling like it's a slippery slope and it's every night, because that can get very frustrating and lead to a very long day.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, ask away.
Yeah, no, thanks, Zoe. So it seems like the hardest bit is your first employee when you're not there. So, and especially now with the travel, certainly we're not, even in Australia, we're not even allowed to come over. So there you go. That seems like that seems the hardest thing to hire someone, especially if you're hiring a senior person with some responsibilities on outcomes. How do you, I mean, we talk about buddying up and stuff, but it's the time zones are against us. There's no one physically there to help someone. How do you mitigate that? I mean, that's just like, seems like such high risk that you said, oh, it's very rarely that you have, people that don't work out. Well, that's how I read it. But it sounds like, wow, unless you use someone like yourself on the ground to try to pick the right candidate that can be self-sufficient when there's no one physically there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a message we wanted you to hear loud and clear. I think that it will require, from a leadership point of view, a daily call, whether that call is early hours for UK or late in the day. A daily call is definitely required. You probably need at least one or two other team members that are checking in, either that they're buddying up, doing a call together, or doing some kind of role shadowing virtually. That's a really good way of doing it, just so that they can understand. For example, you might have a customer support team that they can join, for an hour and just listen in, see what's coming in, so they can sort of live role play and work shadow with them. Goal setting is really important. So, for example, when you're building a new territory, I would certainly say not only guarantee some level of revenue earnings or commission earnings, but have some kind of key sales objectives. So it might be that you say, right, week 4, I would like to see 10 stories out on LinkedIn. I want you to have worked with 6 different, magazines or articles. I want 6 different articles out there. I want you to have secured a new PR agency. I want you to have written up 3 customer testimonials that will be really useful for us. So I think you just need to be really clear in terms of those key sales objectives for the first 6 months. And I think that allows you to continue to have that dialogue of, right, oh, how are you getting on then? What progress have you made towards those numbers? So some of them, they sound like qualitative, but actually if you put them in terms of numbers of articles or meaningful interactions they're having with players on the ground, then you can really monitor somebody's performance quite easily. And also it guides them. They know what's expected, so it doesn't need to feel like you're micromanaging. It can just be like, this is what we expect of you. Does that help, Andrew? Do you still feel a bit concerned?
It does. Well, it does. It's really hard, and I mean, it's hard enough hiring senior people when you're staring at them every day, let alone, and maybe that's me, maybe I'm divulging too much, but
No, you know what? Leading people, leading others is the hardest thing to do. And it requires you to come out of your managing the present. So come out of your email, come out of your everyday, and actually focus your attention on people, because you will only be successful if you lead other people. So most of your day should be having a dialogue with other people. Some people, that's a real leap for them. So I think people like us on the ground can be really helpful. Obviously, I've onboarded many execs. I understand it can be very, very difficult, but they can also set their own goals. So it doesn't all have to come from you. You can say, you know what, I want your 90-day plan. I often say to clients, as the final stage, when you're looking at the final 2 candidates, ask for the 90-day plan. You want a presentation. How are you going to be successful? How are you going to onboard yourself? What are you going to seek to achieve? Tell me what value you're going to deliver in 90 days. And then together you can build that plan.
okay, no, that's good.
Yeah,
These are good.
it's okay. It doesn't need to be that scary. We've done it.
Okay, thanks,
Look, you look better about it already. Look, you're smiling. Fabulous.
Thanks, Andrew. Anya, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. So Zoe, thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting, and I can only agree that it's super important also to build the brand. And sometimes I've also experienced that companies, of course, more focused on building the products and also how to market the product and not the own brand, right? And that's something we definitely need to work on. So feedback on that.
Great.
Yeah. And also, I think it's a real challenge to hire the right people. That will also be a challenge for us in the future. And so I just wanted to know, now in the COVID era, do you think that there is more talent available currently, or is it even worse now, the war for talent? So for example, if you're searching for good salespeople in the UK region, is there some movement in the market? Are people changing their workplaces, or is it, let's say, even worse, the situation?
You know, I was expecting it to be the latter, but it isn't. There has been a lot of movement. There's a lot of great talent on the market. And unfortunately, there are many scale-ups that started last year that have had to let people go too. So I think it's a great time to be out there securing talent at the moment. I think the other thing that's happened is that there has been a void of transparent and creative leadership. So in some scale-ups, even when they have not let people go, people are looking around going, you know what, I've not really heard from my leader very much. They haven't been communicating with me. I've been working from home forever. I hardly see my work colleagues. I'm feeling a bit disenfranchised. So actually that combination has led to a huge amount of movement over the last 3 months. So absolutely not. There's some good talent that's available that shouldn't be available on the market. And there's a few people that are sitting on wobbly home chairs at the moment that might be picked up because their leaders haven't done a good job of looking after them.
It's a really accurate response to what we're seeing as well. But also I would say that there's a lot of average people in the marketplace. Certainly a lot of people are let go because they haven't hit targets or whatever, or the company, they're not performing well. Yes, there are some diamonds or some nuggets out there, but it's really hard to identify or sort of differentiate them from a large number of average performers out there. So I guess you just have to have a very robust process to make sure you're hiring a diamond. That's, I think, the biggest challenge here, because also one thing to stress here, the very good people have choice. The very good people are going to take some convincing to join because they know they're good. High quality people tend to be self-aware. And so, you may want an A player, but you've got to be an A player as well, or aspirationally. So to attract a high quality, you still have to be really, really good, because there's no shortage of activity out there. There are, particularly in the fintech space, a number of niches or areas that are doing very, very well. I know, from a few of our clients who are doing extremely well, they are sort of hoovering up the good talent. So, there's more people out there, but it's not easier to hire good people, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think, mentioning process is a really good point, Peter. So Anya, do think about what's been successful to you, what success looks like in terms of candidates, and how you can do those checks and balances, because many, many people tell a great story. So please do your checks and balances along the way, or work with somebody that can manage that process and make sure we've really checked out and done the reference background checks, really understood what their target was and what their achievements were in the past, because past performance is the best indicator of future performance.
Yeah, a couple of top tips, which I'm happy to share about particularly commercial people. So if they're good, they would have earned a lot of money in the last few years. And there's a little document called the P60, but that's issued by the Inland Revenue every year, and it shows your earnings. So if they are that good, then they should be proud to share that document and say, I earned 400,000 last year, or whatever it may be. So that's a reasonable ask.
It is.
Private information, but why not? Once again, it's backing up their story. And secondly, in the reference process, of course, candidates do not give bad references. They'll give people to speak to because that's what they do. So maybe you can ask, can I speak to a customer, an old customer or recent customer, so I can understand how you've sold stuff to them. And if they say no, then that's an alarm going off for me. So I think, once again, the whole sort of referencing point, due diligence, there are ways and means of making sure that the story is backed up by the data.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah, that
Oh,
will
pleasure.
be a challenge. Thanks.
Great question.
Okay. Any further questions? Oh, here we go. Mark Bond.
Hey, Peter. Hey, Zoe. Just
Hi,
quick
Mark.
question. Do you have a perspective on the use of psychometrics, not only in terms of helping people understand the candidate, but also in terms of downstream management of the candidate?
I do. Thank you for that question. So I am a great supporter from an onboarding point of view to use psychometrics. I don't actually think that as a recruitment tool it can be used to select. I think that people can get very attached to certain psychometrics. I've seen people fall into many a trap, and I think especially in this age of diversity and inclusion, when we can typically look for similar types of people, we can trip ourselves up there. So short answer, not for recruitment purposes, but please do use psychometrics as part of your onboarding. It can be a great way for a team to understand each other. For example, a classic like Myers-Briggs type indicator can be a really good idea, because you can understand where you come from, what your preferences for communications are, who are you, who am I, how are we going to work together. Oh, you know, no wonder we often get to the end of a meeting and we haven't agreed appointments, so that will be because we are, for example. And I think it's just a nice dialogue to have, so do add it as a team building exercise for onboarding purposes.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Great. Do you agree?
Totally. I believe in not only just what you've just said, I also think it's very useful in terms of having somebody understand their inherent qualities and helping them develop downstream.
Absolutely. And I think especially when we look at EQ for selling purposes, there's a lot of research on spin processes or EQ for sales processes at the moment. I think understanding where you come from in terms of your preferences, in terms of your type, is a really good starting point. And building relationships can be instant as well. So the more you understand about the person you're about to have a meeting with, a call with, the more you can start to adapt your own EQ to match their style. Is very, very successful sales technique.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you.
Great. We're in agreement. Anything else? Let's see. Anyone want to come off mute and ask us any further questions? Or indeed maybe what they're going to do differently, or an action they'll take.
So
is what they've heard.
Okay, I think we probably need to wrap, Zoe. So Zoe, I mean, before we say goodbye, if you can give maybe, you know, a few top tips, particularly, you know, maybe UK specific, but also, you know, that first feet on the ground, the first sort of setup.
Yeah, I think having a story is really important. So think long and hard, work with your PR agency about telling your story in a way that's really attractive to your market. Think about your market not only as customers, but as employees as well. So think about that story. What are you going to stand for? People are very specific about what they're looking for in this market. You know, your story from a product base won't always be enough to entice the right people. So think long and hard about that brand piece, and speak to people early. Speak to as many people as you can, get some advice along the way. Lots of people have done it many times before and are always happy to share those experiences. So it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I'm obviously available. I'm sure Peter will share and exchange my details as well. If anyone wants to pick up with me individually, I'm happy to take a call and help you along your way. And I wish you all the success.
Thank you, Zoe. That was fantastic. Thank you for your time. And as you said, if any of you would like some one-on-one discussions, just let us know and we'll arrange it. So listen, that's the end of day 4, week 1. And of course, the Newfound team will be online for the next 15-20 minutes if you have any other asks. And of course, we kick off again on Monday morning. So do not come tomorrow because we won't be here. Well, we will be here, but not online. And Mondays